Book Chapter 2 I Set Out The clock of the square-towered Norman church, a mile away, was striking the hour of 4 as I let myself out into the morning. It was dark as yet, and chilly, but the east was already a faint glimmer of dawn. Reaching the stables, I paused with my hand on the door-hasp, listening to the hissing that told me Adam, the groom, was already at work within. As I entered, he looked up from the saddle he was polishing, and touched his forehead with a grimy forefinger. "You be early abroad, Mr. Peter." "Yes," said I, "I wish to be on Shooter's Hill at sunrise, but first I came to say good bye to Wings." "To be sure, sir," nodded Adam, picking up his lantern. Upon the ensuing interview I will not dwell. It was affecting both to her and to myself, for we were mutually attached. "Sir," said Adam, when at last the stable door had closed behind us, "that there mare knows as you're a-leaving her." "I think she does, Adam." "'Osses be wonderful wise, sir." "Yes, Adam." "This is a bad day for Wings, sir, and all of us, for that matter." "I hope not, Adam." "You be a-going away, they tell me, sir?" "Yes, going away," I nodded. "Wonder what'll become of the mare, sir?" "Ah, yes, I wonder," said I. "Everything to be sold under the will, I think, sir?" "Everything, Adam." "Excuse me, sir," said he, knuckling his forehead, "you won't be wanting ever a groom, will you?" "No, Adam," I answered, shaking my head, "I sha'n't be wanting a groom." "Nor yet a body servant, sir?" "No, Adam, nor yet a body servant." Here there ensued a silence, during which Adam knuckled his right temple again, and I tightened the buckle of my knapsack. "I think, Adam," said I think it is going to be a fine day." "Yes, sir." "Good bye, Adam," said I, and held out my hand. "Good bye, sir." And having shaken my hand, he turned and went back into the stable. So I set off, walking beneath an avenue of trees, looming up gigantic on either hand. At the end was the lodge, and ere I opened the gates, for John, the lodge-keeper, was not yet astir, ere I opened the gates, I say, I paused for one last look at the house that had been all the home I had ever known since I could remember. As I stood thus, with my eyes upon the indistinct mass, I presently distinguished a figure running towards me, and, as he came up, recognized Adam. "It ain't much, sir, but it's all I 'ave," said he, and thrust a short, thick, well-smoked clay pipe into my hand, a pipe that was fashioned to the shape of a negro's head. "It's a good pipe, sir," he went on, "a mortal good pipe, and as sweet as a nut." Saying which, he turned about and ran off, leaving me standing there with his parting gift in my hand. And having put the pipe into an inner pocket, I opened the gate and started off at a good pace along the broad highway. It was a bleak, desolate world that lay about me, a world of shadows and a white, low-lying mist that filled every hollow and swathed hedge and tree, a lowering earth and a frowning heaven, infinitely depressing. But the eastern sky was clear with an ever-growing brightness. Hope lay there, so, as I walked, I kept my eyes toward the east. Being come at last to that eminence which is called Shooter's Hill, I sat down upon a bank beside the way and turned to look back upon the wonderful city. And as I watched, the pearly east changed little by little to a varying pink, which in turn slowly gave place to reds and yellows, until up came the sun in all his majesty, gilding vane and weathercock upon 100 spires and steeples, and making a glory of the river. Far away, upon the white riband of road that led across Blackheath, a chaise was crawling, but, save for that, the world seemed deserted. I sat thus a great while gazing upon the city, and marvelling of the greatness of it. "Truly," said I to myself, "nowhere in the whole world is there such another city as London." And presently I sighed, and, rising, set my back to the city, and went on down the hill. Yes, the sun was up at last, and at his advent the mists rolled up and vanished, the birds awoke in brake and thicket, and lifting their voices, sang together a song of universal praise. Bushes rustled, trees whispered, while from every leaf and twig, from every blade of grass, there hung a flashing jewel. With the mists my doubts of the future vanished too, and I strode upon my way, a very god, king of my destiny, walking through a tribute world where feathered songsters carolled for me, and blossoming flowers wafted sweet perfume upon my path. So I went on gaily down the hill, rejoicing that I was alive. In the knapsack at my back I had stowed a few clothes, the strongest and plainest I possessed, together with a shirt, some half-dozen favorite books, and my translation of Brantome. Quintilian and Petronius I had left with Mr. Grainger, who had promised to send them to a publisher, a friend of his, and in my pocket was my Uncle George's legacy, namely, 10 guineas in gold. And, as I walked, I began to compute how long such a sum might be made to last a man. By practising the strictest economy, I thought I might manage well enough on 2 shillings a day, and this left me some 100 odd days in which to find some means of livelihood, and if a man could not suit himself in such time, then, thought I, he must be a fool indeed. Thus my thoughts caught something of the glory of the bright sky above and the smiling earth about me, as I strode along that broad highway which was to lead me I know not whither, yet where disaster was already lying in wait for me, as you shall hear. Book 1, Chapter 3 concerns itself mainly with a hat. As the day advanced, the sun beat down with an ever-increasing heat, and, what with this and the dust, I presently grew very thirsty. Wherefore, as I went, I must needs conjure up tantalizing visions of ale that foamed gloriously in tankards, that sparkled in glasses, and gurgled deliciously from the spouts of earthen pitchers, and I began to look about me for some inn where these visions might be realized, and my burning thirst nobly quenched, as such a thirst deserved to be. On I went through this beautiful land of Kent, past tree and hedge and smiling meadow, by hill and dale and sloping upland, while ever the sun grew hotter, the winding road the dustier, and my mighty thirst the mightier. At length, reaching the brow of a hill, I espied a small inn or hedge tavern that stood back from the glare of the road, seeming to nestle in the shade of a great tree, and joyfully I hastened toward it. As I approached I heard loud voices, raised as though in altercation, and a hat came hurtling through the open doorway and bounding into the road, rolled over and over to my very feet. And looking down at it, I saw that it was a very ill-used hat, frayed and worn, dented of crown, and broken of brim, yet beneath its sordid shabbiness there lurked the dim semblance of what it had once been, for, in the scratched and tarnished buckle, in the jaunty curl of the brim, it still preserved a certain pitiful air of rakishness. Wherefore I stooped, and, picking it up, began to brush the dust from it as well as I might. I was thus engaged when there arose a sudden bull-like roar, and, glancing up, I beheld a man who reeled backwards out of the inn, and who, after staggering a yard or so, thudded down into the road, and so lay, staring vacantly up at the sky. Before I could reach him, however, he got upon his legs and, crossing unsteadily to the tree I have mentioned, leaned there, and I saw there was much blood upon his face, which he essayed to wipe away with the cuff of his coat. Now, upon his whole person, from the crown of his unkempt head down to his broken, dusty boots, there yet clung that air of jaunty, devil-may-care rakishness which I had seen and pitied in his hat. Observing as I came up how heavily he leaned against the tree, and noting the extreme pallor of his face and the blank gaze of his sunken eyes, I touched him upon the shoulder. "Sir, I trust you are not hurt?" said I. "Thank you," he answered, his glance still wandering. "Not in the least, I assure you. Merely tap on the nose, sir. Unpleasant, damnably, but no more, no more." "I think," said I, holding out the battered hat, "I think this is yours." His eye encountering it in due time, he reached out his hand somewhat fumblingly, and took it from me with a slight movement of the head and shoulders that might have been a bow. "Thank you. Yes, should know it among 1,000," said he dreamily. "An old friend, and a very much tried one. Many thanks." With which words he clapped the much tried friend upon his head, and, with another movement that might have been a bow, turned short round and strode away. And as he went, despite the careless swing of his shoulder, his legs seemed to falter somewhat in their stride, and once I thought he staggered. Yet, as I watched, half-minded to follow after him, he settled his hat more firmly with a light tap upon the crown, and, thrusting his hands into the pockets of his threadbare coat, fell to whistling lustily, and so, turning a bend in the road, vanished from my sight. And presently, my thirst recurring to me, I approached the inn, and, descending 3 steps, entered its cool shade. Here I found 4 men, each with his pipe and tankard, to whom a large, red-faced, big-fisted fellow was holding forth in a high state of heat and indignation. "Wot's England a comin' to? That's what I wants to know," he was saying. "Wot's England a comin' to, when thievin' robbers can come a walkin' in on you, a stealin' a pint o' your best ale out o' your very own tankard under your very own nose? Wot's it a comin' to?" "Ah!" nodded the other solemnly, "that's it, Joel. What?" "Why," growled the red-faced innkeeper, bringing his big fist down with a bang, "it's a comin' to perdition. That's what it's a comin' to." "And what?" inquired a rather long, bony man, with a face half hidden in sandy whisker. "What might perdition be, Joel? Likewise, wheer?" "You must be a danged fool, Tom, my lad," retorted he whom they called Joel, redder in the face than ever. "Ay, that you must," chorused the others. "I only asked what and where." "Only asked, did ye?" repeated Joel scornfully. "Ah!" nodded the other, "that's all." "But you're always a axin', you are," said Joel gloomily. "Which I notice," retorted the man Tom, blowing into his tankard, "which I notice is you ain't never over fond o' answerin'." "Oh, I ain't I?" "No, you ain't," repeated Tom, "nohow." Here the red-faced man grew so very red indeed that the others fell to coughing, all together, and shuffling their feet and giving divers other evidences of their embarrassment, all save the unimpressionable Tom. Seizing the occasion that now presented itself, I knocked loudly upon the floor with my stick, whereupon the red-faced man, removing his eyes slowly and by degrees from the unconcerned Tom, fixed them darkly upon me. "Supposing," said I, "supposing you are so very obliging as to serve me with a pint of ale." "Then supposing you show me the colour o' your money," he growled. "Come money first. I aren't a-taking no more risks." For answer I laid the coins before him, and having pocketed the money, he filled and thrust a foaming tankard towards me, which I emptied forthwith and called upon him for another. "Where's your money?" "Here," said I, tossing a sixpence to him, "and you can keep the change."
"Why, you see, sir," he began, somewhat mollified, "it be precious 'ard to know who's a gentleman and who ain't, who's a thief and who ain't these days."
"How so?"
"Why, only a little while ago, just afore you, chap comes a walkin' in here, no account much to look at, but very 'aughty for all that. Comes a walkin' in here, 'e do, and calls for a pint o' ale. You 'eard 'im, all on ye?"
He broke off, turning to the others.
"You all 'eard 'im call for a pint o' ale?"
"Ah, we heard him," they nodded.
"Comes a walkin' in here, 'e do, bold as brass. I calls for a pint o' ale, drinks it off, and 'ands me 'is 'at. You all seen 'im 'and me 'is 'at?"
he inquired, once more addressing the others. "Every man of us," the four chimed in, with 4 individual nods.
"What's this 'ere?" says I, turnin' it over. "It's a 'at, or once was," says he. "Well, I don't want it," says I. "Since you've got it, you better keep it," says he. "What for?" says I. "Why," says he, "it's only fair, seein' I've got your ale. It's a case of exchange," says he. "Oh, is it?" says I, and pitched the thing out into the road, and 'im after it, and so it ended. "And what," said the red-faced man, nodding his big head at me, "what d'ye think o' that, now?"
"Why, I think you were perhaps a trifle hasty," said I.
"Oh, you do you?"
"Yes," I nodded.
"On for why?"
"Well, you will probably remember that the hat had a band around it."
I'll war away it were, too."
"And that in the band was a buckle."
All scratched and rusty it were. Well?"
"Well, that tarnished buckle was of silver."
"Silver!"
gasped the man, his jaw falling. "And easily worth 5 shillings, perhaps more, so that I think you were, upon the whole, rather hasty." Saying which, I finished my ale, and, taking up my staff, stepped out into the sunshine. Book I, Chapter 4. I meet with a great misfortune. That day I passed through several villages, stopping only to eat and drink. Thus evening was falling, as, having left fair Sevenoaks behind, I came to the brow of a certain hill, a long and very steep descent, which I think is called the River Hill. And here, rising stark against the evening sky, was a gibbet, and, standing beneath it, a man, a short, square man in a somewhat shabby coat of a bottle green, and with a wide-brimmed beaver hat sloped down over his eyes, who stood with his feet well apart, sucking the knob of a stick he carried, while he stared up at that which dangled by a stout chain from the cross-beam of the gibbet, something black and shrivelled and horrible, that had once been human. As I came up, the man drew the stick from his mouth and touched the brim of his hat with it in salutation.
"An object lesson, sir,"
said he, and nodded towards the loathsome mass above. "A very hideous one," said I, pausing, "and, I think, a very useless one."
"He was as fine a fellow as ever thrust toe into stirrup,"
the man went on, pointing upwards with his stick,
"though you'd never think so to look at him now."
"It's a horrible sight," said I.
"It is,"
nodded the man.
"It's a sight to turn a man's stomach, that it is."
"You knew him, perhaps?" said I.
"Knew him,"
repeated the man, staring at me over his shoulder.
"Knew him, all that is, I knew of him."
"A highwayman?"
"Nick Swope his name was,"
answered the man, with a nod.
"Hung at Maidstone, assizes last year, and a very good end he made of it too. And here he be, hung up in chains all nat'ral and regular, as a warning to all and sundry.
the more shame to England," said I. "To my thinking it is a scandal that her highways should be rendered odious by such horrors, and as wicked as it is useless."
"'Od rot me!"
cried the fellow, slapping a cloud of dust from his coat with his stick.
"'Ark to that now."
"What?" said I. "Do you think for one moment that such a sight, horrible though it is, could possibly deter a man from robbery or murder whose mind is already made up to it by reason of circumstances, or starvation?"
"Well, but it's an old custom, as old as this 'ere road."
"True," said I, "and that of itself proves my argument, for men have been hanged and gibbeted all these years, yet robbery and murder abide with us still, and are of daily occurrence."
"Why, as to that, sir,"
said the man, falling into step beside me as I walked on down the hill,
"I won't say yes, and I won't say no, but what I do say is, as many a man might think twice afore running the chance of comin' to that. Look!"
and he stopped to turn and point back at the gibbet with his stick.
"Nick can't last much longer, though I've knowed 'em hang a good time, but they made a botch of Nick. Not enough tar, you could see where the sun catches him there."
Once more, though my whole being revolted at the sight, I must needs turn to look at the thing, the tall black shaft of the gibbet, and the grisly horde that dangled beneath with its chains and iron bands, and from this back again to my companion, to find him regarding me with a curiously twisted smile, and a long-barrelled pistol held within a foot of my head. "Well?" said I, staring.
"Sir,"
said he, tapping his boot with his stick,
"I must trouble you for the shiner I see a winking at me from your cravat, likewise your watch and any small change you may have."
For a moment I hesitated, glancing from his grinning mouth swiftly over the deserted road, and back again.
"Likewise," said the fellow,
"I must ask you to be sharp about it." It was with singularly clumsy fingers that I drew the watch from my fob and the pin from my cravat, and passed them to him.
"Now your pockets,"
he suggested.
"turn 'em out."
This command I reluctantly obeyed, bringing to light my 10 guineas, which were as yet intact, and which he pocketed forthwith, and 2 pennies, which he bade me keep.
"For," said he, "'twill buy you a draught of ale, sir, and there's good stuff to be had at the White Hart yonder, and there's nothing like a good draught of ale to comfort a man in any such small adversity like this here. As to that knapsack now," he pursued, eyeing it thoughtfully, "it looks heavy and might hold valuables, but then, on the other hand, it might not, and those there straps takes times to unbuckle, and—" He broke off suddenly, for from somewhere on the hill below us came the unmistakable sound of wheels, whereupon the fellow very nimbly ran across the road, turned, nodded, and vanished among the trees and underbrush that clothed the steep slope down to the valley below. Book I, Chapter 5 The Bagman. I was yet standing there, half stunned by my loss and the suddenness of it all, when a tilbury came slowly round a bend in the road, the driver of which nodded lazily in his seat, while his horse, a sorry, jaded animal, plodded wearily up the steep slope of the hill. As he approached, I hailed him loudly, upon which he suddenly dived down between his knees, and produced a brass-bound blunderbuss. "What's to do?"
cried he, a thick-set, round-faced fellow.
"What's to do, eh?"
And he covered me with the wide mouth of the blunderbuss. "Thieves!" said I. "I've been robbed, and not 3 minutes since."
"Oh!"
he exclaimed in a tone of great relief, and, with the color returning to his plump cheeks,
"Is that the way of it?"
"It is," said I, "and a very bad way. The fellow has left me but 2 pence in the world."
"Twopence, ah?"
"Come," I went on, "you are armed, I see. The thief took to the brushwood here not 3 minutes ago. We may catch him yet."
"Catch him?"
repeated the fellow, staring. "Yes, don't I tell you he has stolen all the money I possess?"
"Except twopence,"
said the fellow.
"Yes." "Well, twopence ain't to be sneezed at, and if I was you—"
"Come, we're losing time," said I, cutting him short.
"But my mare, what about my mare?"
"She'll stand," I answered, "she's tired enough." The Bagman, for such I took him to be, sighed, and, blunderbuss in hand, prepared to alight, but, in the act of doing so, paused.
"Was the rascal armed?"
he inquired, over his shoulder. "To be sure he was," said I. The Bagman got back into his seat and took up the reins. "What now?" I inquired.
"It's that accursed mare of mine," he answered. "She'll bolt again, d'ye see? Twice yesterday, and once the day before, she bolted, sir, and on a road like this."
"Then lend me your blunderbuss."
"I can't do that,"
he replied, shaking his head. "But why not?" said I impatiently.
"Because this is a dangerous road, and I don't intend to be left unarmed on a dangerous road. I never have been, and I never will, and there's an end of it, d'ye see."
"Then do you mean to say that you refuse your aid to a fellow traveler? That you will sit there and let the rogue get away with all the money I possess in the world?"
"Oh, no, not on no account. Just you get up here beside me, and we'll drive to the White Hart. I'm well known at the White Hart. We'll get a few honest fellows at our heels, and have this thieving, rascally villain in the twinkling of an—"
He stopped suddenly, made a frantic clutch at the blunderbuss, and sat staring. Turning short round, I saw the man in the beaver hat standing within a yard of us, fingering his long pistol, and with the same twisted smile upon his lips.
"I've a mind,"
said he, nodding his head at the Bagman,
"I've a great mind to blow your face off."
The blunderbuss fell to the roadway with a clatter.
"Thieving, rascally villain, was it? Damme, I think I will blow your face off." "No, don't do that,"
said the Bagman in a strange, jerky voice.
"What'd be the good?"
"Why, that there poor animal wouldn't have to drag that fat carcass of yours up and down hills, for one thing."
"I'll get out and walk."
"And it might learn you to keep a civil tongue in your head."
I didn't mean any offence."
"Then chuck us your purse," growled the other, "and be quick about it." The Bagman obeyed with wonderful celerity, and I heard the purse chink as the footpad dropped it into the pocket of his greatcoat. "As for you," said he, turning to me, "you get on your way and never mind me. Forget you ever had 10 guineas, and don't go a-risking your valuable young life. Come, up with you!" And he motioned me into the tilbury with his pistol.
"What about my blunderbuss?"
expostulated the Bagman, as I seated myself beside him.
"You give me my blunderbuss? Cost me £5 it did."
"More fool you," said the highwayman, and, picking up the unwieldy weapon, he hove it into the ditch. "As to our argument regarding gibbetin', sir," said he, nodding to me, "I'm rayther inclined to think you was in the right on it arter all." Then, turning towards the Bagman, "Drive on, fat face," said he, "and sharp's the word." Whereupon the Bagman whipped up his horse, and, as the tired animal struggled forward over the crest of the hill, I saw the highwayman still watching us. Very soon we came in view of the White Hart, an inn I remembered to have passed on the right-hand side of the road, and scarce were we driven up to the door than down jumped the Bagman, leaving me to follow at my leisure, and, running into the tap, forthwith began recounting his loss to all and sundry, so that I soon found we were become the centre of a gaping crowd, much to my disgust. Indeed, I would have slipped away, but each time I attempted to do so, the Bagman would appeal to me to corroborate some statement.
"Galloping Dick himself, or I'm a Dutchman," he cried for the 20th time. "Up he comes, bold as brass, bless you, and a horse pistol in each hand. 'Hold hard,' says I, and ups with my blunderbuss. You remember as I ups with my blunderbuss?"
he inquired, turning to me. "Quite well," said I.
"Ah, but you should have seen the fellow's face when he saw my blunderbuss ready at my shoulder. Green it was, green as grass, for if ever there was death in a man's face, and sudden death at that, There was sudden death in mine when, all at once, my mare, my accursed mare, jibbed."
"Yes, yes," cried half a dozen breathless voices. "What then?"
"Why then, gentlemen,"
said the Bagman, shaking his head and frowning round upon the ring of intent faces,
"why then, gentlemen, being a resolute, determined fellow, I did what any other man of spirit would have done. I—"
"Dropped your blunderbuss," said I.
To be sure, I did."
"And he pitched it into the ditch," said I. Nodded the Bagman dubiously, while the others crowded nearer. "And then he took your money, and called you fool and fat face, and so it ended," said I. With which I pushed my way from the circle, and, finding a quiet corner beside the chimney, sat down, and, with my last twopence, paid for a tankard of ale. Section 2